Hey there, welcome to Table Tennis Philosophy. Got a question that I'm going to answer today because I've frequently commented that I've used long pips and use it about 90% of the time on my forehand. And somebody else asked for me to make a video about this because they wanted to know a little bit more about it. Either they were going to start doing it or they mentioned somebody at their club attacked with long pips, and I assume they attacked pretty effectively with it. So this is going to be a two-part video. First part is going to be how to attack with long pips on the forehand, and the second part is going to be how to return long pips attacks, whether they're forehand or backhand. Either way can be a pretty devastating shot. So here's the first part of it. If you're going to consider long pips attacks on your forehand, realize that you can't overhit. That's one of the big things. You're going to sacrifice some speed, even though there are some long pips that are fairly fast. They aren't going to give you near as much speed as sometimes they feel like they're giving you. You approach hitting them basically like you would hit short pips with an open racket, but or flat racket, or possibly even a bit more open and low. And so to really get that forehand attack with the pips, you do have to hit it and hit it flat, hit it quick. What ends up happening though is if you're not in position to do that, you end up doing a lot of what we call pips roll shots. It's sort of a modified looping motion, but much slower. And it's a great shot for controlling the ball. It's a great shot for putting the ball where you want it to go, but is not really the kind of shot that you're hoping to get to end the point. It's usually a shot to stay in the point, or it's a shot that you're using mostly for placement, and then when the ball gets up high enough, then you can hit it. And what you're going to find, and one of the reasons I'm currently not hitting with long pips on my forehand, going more towards a medium or short pip, is that in order to get the ball over, you're going to have to make adjustments that ends up making the long pips forehand attack not nearly as devastating to your opponent as you would hope it would be. You'll get some, and but what'll happen is your less experienced players will just be greatly frustrated anytime you hit with the long pips, whether forehand or backhand, but particularly a good forehand shot with long pips will frustrate inexperienced players. Better players will know how to handle that, and they'll basically get used to it and learn how to lift the ball. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so what do you do now if you're on the other side of one of these long pips attacks? If they're attacking with long pips on their forehand or even on their backhand? First thing you have to do, you have to recognize this. I'm surprised at how many times players that are first starting out and they know they're playing against somebody that has long pips or anti-spin on one side of the racket, and they don't identify, say it's on the black side, and they don't even know if their opponent hit it with the red or the black. Well, the color of the funny rubber is your first hint that something's coming back differently. So you first have to recognize it. Make sure that you're aware of that. Now, when you're first starting playing, you're not thinking about that necessarily. You're just trying to hit the ball, perhaps, but you've got to get used to that. And sometimes you can vary your shots greatly. I used to play an opponent who used long pips very effectively, and I would just wait till use the smooth side so I could attack, and it was usually a lot of me having to lift long pips blocks over and over and over till I got that one that had a little bit more spin on it. Much easier to attack that one, and usually it would just had to be very, very aware of which side of the racket he was using, and it has to be, one side has to be black and the other has to be red or one of the other approved colors. So you got to look out for that. Recognize it, then recognize that the trajectory of the ball is not coming the same way as if they hit it with smooth rubber. If you treat the ball as if it had top spin the same way that they had hit it with their smooth side, you're going to put the ball in the net every single time. And there's nothing more frustrating than getting caught off guard every time your opponent uses one side of the racket, and they can count on you putting the ball in the net every single time. So what you're going to do is, number one, recognize which side of the racket they use, recognize that the trajectory is different, and recognize also that these long pips hits quite often aren't quite as fast as you might expect them to be. So what you're going to have to do, rather than just hit it the way you would normally hit it, which is going to cause problems, you're going to have to lift the ball. Think your stroke going much more up than forward, and once you've figured that out, any shot with the long pips, unless it's particularly well placed or particularly tricky, you really won't have that much trouble lifting those shots. And in fact, I would say that hitting a long pips attack is in some ways easier than dealing with a lot of long pips blocks. Either way, you're going to have to lift them, but you'll have an opportunity to make a stronger shot when they actually hit the ball and attack and put a little more speed on with those long pips. The big thing is, don't just try to make your normal stroke as if it had smooth rubber. You're going to have to lift it, loop it, get it up over the net, because if any error on your part is more than likely going to end up putting it in the net, and that's what your opponent's hoping for, and that's why they would use long pips and instead of short pips, which would be faster. The long pips are obviously trickier, and if you can get your opponents to put the ball in the net over and over, it's an easy way to get points. But again, this is not going to work with more advanced players. Even good intermediate players usually figure out how to lift the ball, but it'll definitely throw off the inexperienced players, or just any player that hasn't played against long pips, which that can cause them problems. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to lift it. So hopefully that tells you a little bit about the attacking long pips player, and particularly the long pips player that uses it on his forehand. All right, thanks a lot. See ya.